All right. Good morning, everybody. Guys, another trip around the sun, which means it is Saturday once again, and it's time to let it rip. We have a spicy conversation for y'all today, but before we get there, a couple of things that I'd like to cover right off the top. If you are unfamiliar with what things happen or what happens here on Saturday mornings, this is a time for conversation, discourse, the whole nine yards. And so these topics, these conversations, these are greatly impacted by you guys getting into the comment section, getting active, chiming into the conversation, asking your questions, all of that kind of stuff. So, what I'd like you to do is, regardless of whatever platform that you may be watching on, navigate your way to the comment section, chime in, say good morning, let us know where you're tuning in from, and along the way, make sure you ask any questions that you may have, raise any concerns you may have, because here's the reality, folks. We've been doing this long enough that we can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that if you have the question, then that means more than just you has the question. So go ahead and sound off because we want to hear from you. Without further ado, I turn you over to the host with the most to get this shindig underway. Pastor TC, good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It is good to be here Saturday morning. Hope everyone's brave for a engaging conversation. Today's topic is God a moral monster? Oh my goodness, that's already a fire starter. So we're going to talk about a subject that we actually talked about the previous stream that we had. I know it's been a week since we've been off, but the prior week we talked about you know, three, we're talking about scriptures that are mishandled. And in that conversation, we talked about how a lot of this is how people view God in
Mhm.
scripture, which overall comes from that one point where we're talking about God giving us more than we can handle. And so when I was sitting there thinking, I was like, well, that seems to be a crisis of a lot of people,
Yeah.
is they think God is pulling the strings as a puppeteer, allow them to go through various problems or pretty much letting bad things happen to them, which I believe altogether we discussed that, people look at that as morality a lot of time, making God this moral monster, this person who's just out to get you or supremely out to bless you. Because it's two sides of that coin, right? If I do all my P's and Q's and then God blesses me. If I don't, then God doesn't, and I get bad stuff happening. So that's the gist of the conversation. So to get this started, I'm going to ask I feel like a century long question just to get the ball rolling. Why does God allow bad stuff to happen to good people? Let it rip.
It's one of the first questions I asked on the air and teed up to have a conversation about when Buddy Walk first started. My then co-host was like, "Are you really want to go there? You really want to cover that?" And me being so wet behind the ears, being like, "Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no problems whatsoever with addressing this." And part of it is the fact that at that point in time, just to be perfectly honest with you, I was filled with all of the cliche answers and all of that kind of stuff. And so it wasn't incredibly deep, but it, because of things that I had experienced, it all kind of, there wasn't any grand mystique to it. There wasn't any grand, like, I didn't view it inside of those parameters. But the second that I stepped to the mic and outletted about, um the ins and outs of just the human existence, I was very quickly met with opposition of folks that, yeah, no, that's exactly, they put that burden directly on God's shoulders. that he is the heavy for all of the things that are going wrong, and that it's the whole quote unquote justice system. I don't mean legally, I mean like cosmically is out of whack, and all of that because of the things that happen. um you know, it's it's a weird thing because I think on one hand there's so many there's so many surface layer answers that you can give, or simplistic or simple or straight to the point or those kinds of things, but you almost it almost does the conversation a disservice, because tied into this question is inherently emotionalism.
Mm.
There's something, I think part of why this is so highly contested is when we ask this question, when we come forward and ask this, a part of us is baked into that very question because we're coming loaded with our experiences, with our thoughts, with our feelings, with our emotions, and all of those kinds of things. And so I think when we ask the question, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? It's tricky, and there's a lot of responsibility if you want that question really, if you want to be authentic to getting an answer to the question, because you're not only navigating, okay, so what is this word, how do we define this word, and how do we define that word, but also what am I carrying into asking the question, because life is complicated, life is hard, and generally more often than not, I'm not going to say that it's sometimes it's just the inquisitive person who's never really experienced tragedy that's asking this question, but more often than not, generally when somebody is asking this question, they are putting themselves into the role of quote unquote good people, right? So why does God allow bad things to happen to me, is essentially
Mm.
what what the question
Mhm.
becomes. So that to me, I think before, I wouldn't be me if I wasn't pointing at the giant like danger ahead signs
Mhm.
that are on the road towards asking or answering this question before you even answer the question. You know?
Yeah, this is always going to be a difficult question, and I think you nailed it, Joe. Because when a person comes to ask this question, there is something that has happened
Mm.
Mhm.
that creates this question. You know, they don't ask this question just in general. They ask this question because they've seen something, experienced something, something happened to someone that they care about, a situation transpired that they're like, I can't wrap my head around it. Even well meaning Christians who, would say are, genuinely, they love God. They're like, let's say that, I know a lady that lost her purse on an airplane. And, you know, in order to comfort herself, she said, well, God must have had a purpose for that.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it's innocent in a situation like that because there's nobody's getting hurt or anything, but just that simple statement says, well, they don't understand what's down at the end of the road
Yeah.
if we keep that logic in all scenarios, right?
Yep.
It seems innocent at the time, like, yeah, lost my purse, no big deal. God must have had a purpose for that. He must really have a plan for that because, things happen for a reason,
Yep.
and sometimes we don't understand why these things happen. And so when you start talking about, bad things happening to good people, on a deeper level, on um, a level of where there's more pain, where there's more loss, where there's tragedy, even mortality. It gets even more intense. And so when this question is asked, you're like, okay, so why is that? Well, the hard part about this is that there's a simple answer that does not seem sufficient, right?
Right.
It just like, based upon the weight of how this situation impacted me, this event impacted me, the answer doesn't seem to suffice.
Yeah.
Like that can't be it. That just can't be the answer to this particular question. So why do good things happen to bad, good thing bad things happen to good people? Why do bad things happen to good people? Well, what's interesting is that, you know, bad things happen to all people.
Mm.
Everybody goes through bad times, even quote unquote bad people. And then who are we to judge? you know,
Right, because I think that's my
who's
question.
good and who's bad, right?
Who's good and who's bad? And
Yep.
right. And so,
yeah,
so at the end of the day, maybe the question should be, well, why do bad things happen? Period. you know, why
right.
do bad things happen? Period. You
Yeah.
know, and then let's now dive into the fact that we live in a world where one person's choice can cause another person harm, and they maybe did not mean harm. They,
Mhm,
and but the ability to make that decision also has the ripple effect of it affecting someone else.
mhm,
And now you have to ask, well, why does God let us make bad decisions? And so it just keeps going to a point where we want God to be something that we really don't want him to be, but we only want him to be that in situations that benefit us. Like, we don't want God to control us.
mm.
We want to be able to make our decisions, right? But at the same time, I do want God to control that person who's doing something that will affect me and hurt me. And so the the this question is always going to be extremely difficult to answer, because it's going to be based on the person asking it, their willingness to have the conversation and work through it, because
Yep.
it's just not one of those things that, boom, I'm gonna give you this answer and be like, that doesn't suffice. So I'm gonna stop there because I know there's more that we want to get into.
I
Mhm.
think you asked an I think you inadvertently asked an important question though. It's the other side of the coin. It's the other side of the pillow. So the question that we're positing currently is, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? But flip the question around. Why does God allow good things to happen to bad people?
Yeah,
Right?
there you go. Go ahead and cook. Go ahead and
Yeah,
cook.
yeah, yeah.
So it's the same, it's the same idea. We look around the world and we're like, okay, like objectively by our standards and measurements, such and such a person, whoever, is not a good person, but it seems like they got all the breaks. It seems like they have really good things happening to them, or they have benefits of life. And so I think in the same way that we approach trying to question God's morality from the standpoint of bad things happening to us, I think that exact same point can be reached from the opposite direction of asking about God's morality and why he would create a system that would allow for good things to happen to objectively bad people. And I think there's you hit on something, Ant, that I think needs to unfortunately be talked about in the midst of this entire paradigm, and that's this idea of you can call it determinism, you can you can call it sovereignty. You can now, mind you, words mean things. I'm not saying that all of these words are interchangeable, but I am recognizing that these are words that are introduced into the conversation and are oftentimes used interchangeably and all of that. And you had said, okay, so there's a purpose for that. Sorry about that. There's
Mhm.
a purpose for that. There's a purpose for for that person, doing bad things for good reasons, or there's a purpose for this tragedy happening, or this. Okay, so let's go with the woman who loses her purse on an airplane. Okay, As long as that could turn out where, okay, the worst you got to do is make some phone calls, maybe you're out $100, and the whole thing is all squared and all of that kind of stuff. And so we'll go with that version of events to make my point, where it's something that we the milk is not very far reaching, right? Maybe we only need one rag to clean up the spilt milk from the situation. Now it becomes a lot easier every single time that we go to the well of, oh, God must have had a purpose. Oh, God must have had a purpose. You know what I mean? Like, you drive by Wendy's every single day
Mm.
and you're like, man, I should go home and I should make this, and I should make this salad, I should meal prep, I should do all these things. Or, man, I'm tired, I'm in a rush, I got to get from point A to point B. Let me just go grab a burger and fries so that way I can get about my day and all of that kind of stuff. It's a matter of this thing that I'm utilizing helps to um helps to make this other aspect of my life easier,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And at first, it's a death by a thousand cuts, right? At first, it's that first cut, okay, whatever. Second part, okay. So that third, fourth, fifth, and then suddenly, next thing you know,
Mm.
there's deeper things that happen. And what's your go-to? Well, God must have had a purpose.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so just between the three of us, right? Nobody else. Just between the three of us. I got just a moment of confession time with the saints, right? So I remember the first time that, in the midst of very real and significant tragedy, when somebody told me, well, God had a purpose for that death. Y'all, I wanted to choose violence. It was a very real thing that I just wanted to lose my ever loving mind when I heard that. Because when you hear that and you've experienced tragedy,
Mm.
yes, it can be comforting if you honestly believe it, but if you know better, it is some of the most disrespectful garbage
Mm.
that you can hear as an individual. It's just and it's honestly enough to make somebody turn completely away from God. Because if that's true, then honestly, if that's true, then God is in fact a moral monster.
Scandalous.
Yeah.
Hmm. Uh, I just been listening and take care of the stream, but I think the like we say not to. I don't want to recirculate a lot of things that already been said, but I will say a lot of the crisis of the stance of the question comes from traumatic events and emotional events, and so and also a person's view of God being partial in itself, because it always puts God in a place where his fault or responsibility on both perspectives. It's his fault when tragedy happens. It's his responsibility to bless or to mitigate good things. I use the word bless, but good things or bad things happening from any sets of people that we um, fit to be good or bad. Because I was thinking my question earlier, and I hit it is, well, what are we defining as good and bad?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think even in that is a question, not to put a question within a question, is because we say good people, there has to be a bad people, right? And so I think if I had to take a stab at the logic of that thinking, I think it's people who are mass killers, rapists, and whatever foul gutter stuff you can find in human beings. That's what we find as bad people. But the question is, well, what does God define? If he even defines such a way, because I don't think God uses language like that as a bad person. I think we hear words more like fallen, sinful nature. We hear things like that. Even those words have been polluted and weighed down with man's perspective, not actually God's perspective. And so, yeah, that's always going to be a thing because I want to tread lightly here because I don't want to be offensive, but I kind of want to be honest from my perspective. And um, is that usually we're talking about these situations, we're trying to tell God how to be God, and the problem is, well, we're not God,
Mhm.
and so you're thinking about things on a very cosmic level. I think a lot of times from perspective, and I want to make this very clear to anyone who might be listening. It's not to dismiss any trauma or pain that you have, because that's real. When someone goes through hard stuff, a loss, an injustice, or anything like that, those are real intense feelings that should not be overlooked.
Mhm.
But I will say this in the same vein is that our perspective is usually narrow.
Mhm.
We can't see a holistic picture because to see a holistic picture, you have to even look at the person who's done the wrong or the situation that's happening to you. You have to look at it as a whole. I guess I'll go ahead and use an example to explain what I mean. So if someone in my family, actually I have an aunt, I'll use myself. I have an aunt that got murdered before I even got a chance to know her. And it ravished my mom, who now is past, rest her soul. We still don't know who did that, right? So from my perspective, my mother's perspective, it's always going to be justice. Who did this to my sister? But there's a whole nother perspective. There's the murderer's perspective, but we don't look at the murderer's perspective, right? Because he had no right to do what he did. When God looks at things, he looks at everything. The redemption of a person to so much more. And I think that's scandalous, right? Because then we have to talk about, and I don't want this stream to take multiple bridge, but it is called Let Rip.
Mhm.
But what do we do when bad people want redemption? Do they
Yep.
even deserve redemption, right? So who is God to let bad people be redeemed?
Mm.
And I think, and again, you said something very interesting and powerful. I think you were talking about how I'm okay with God exhorting justice on my behalf, but the minute I'm the person that's unjust,
Mhm.
now it goes to God's control me, which kind of gives me to my next question, oddly enough. And if you guys are watching, feel free to engage. I know I've been sitting there in the chat already. This is one of those ones where I really would love to hear from people. We would love to hear from people because
Yeah.
it's good for us street pastors and apostles get on here and have this conversation because um, we talk about stuff like this kind of often, but this stream will be so powerful if we get your perspective because you might have friends, family members.
Yeah.
Let me phrase the question. You're going to have friends, family members that are going to ask this question. I guarantee you. I am now 34 years old, and this question never eludes me. I'm serious. I've heard this question in almost every phase of my life. I heard it, for at least where I could recognize the question. So we'll go ahead and count high school, college, and now as a full adult, I've heard this question because tragedy has happened through all stages of those life. Through my
Yeah.
life, I've seen stuff happen. Went through so many different things, pandemics, crises in the United States, wars, and all these things happen, and people are going to ask this question. So, highly jump in there, highly engage. This is what we're going to do. We're going to pay attention to the chat. We do be flowing, okay. We be cooking, but we're watching that chat, and we're going to highlight a question that you have, a comment you have. I guess I'll go ahead and do this right now, Joe. Be respectful, obviously. Don't be disrespectful. I don't know that goes without being said, but I'll go ahead and say that now, so that way there's just all the rules are on the table. So again, segueing into my next question, which I want you to really hear when I ask it. Everyone's watching. And I want you to really slow down because it might be really simple to answer, but I want you to really slow down because it connects to the previous question and where we're going. Does God really allow free will? So, does God really allow free will? Like I said, I want us to slow down because it's easy to answer,
Mhm.
right? But it's connected to the previous question. So, does God really allow free will? Let's go ahead and let it rip. I'll let you guys go ahead and jump in there. And I'll be looking for our friends to jump in as well, see if anyone's looking. But let's go ahead. Does God really allow free will?
Yeah, I think Joe brought it up early with, from a theological standpoint, this idea of, that it's deterministic, that God has planned out everything that's going to happen to you. So you really aren't making choices. you're
Mhm,
really, you're really just doing what God wants you to do your whole life. And I think it goes to something, and I want to say it on I guess a layman's, terminology, that just because God knows something's going to happen doesn't mean that that's what he wants to happen. It
mhm,
doesn't mean that that's, his plan. I
mhm,
taught um on God's will, and one of the things that I learned in studying God's will is that everything that happens doesn't mean that that's what God wanted to happen. And I
mhm,
know that's a struggle for people because they're thinking if this happened, then God wanted this to happen. But that's
Right.
not true. There are a lot of things that happen that, God, it's not what he wanted to happen, but he allowed, he makes room for, he's created a system where you get to choose your next move. He may know what that next move is going to be, but he doesn't stop you from. He may warn you, he may give directions through scripture of what moves to make, but ultimately, God's will is something that can be accepted or rejected by man.
mhm,
That we do have a choice. We do have a responsibility in how we live our lives, and choices, decisions lead to consequences and outcomes. That's just the reality of a thing. And when you understand that fully, you walk in with your eyes open. You know, I think I saw a video. They said we have every day we have choices and chances. You have choices and chances. So you
mhm,
have a choice. You have choices that you make and chances to do things. What do you do with those two things that you have every day? And that's on, to me, a human level. That's not even super theological or spiritual. I think people know that on a human level. But when things happen out of our control or seemingly beyond our actions, that's when we start looking for, well, there must be an outside influence. This must be something that God is doing to me. If there's a God out there, he must have done this because I didn't do that. I didn't want that to happen. That's not the way I wanted things to go. And so if they're going that way, then he must have chose that for me. If they fired me, God, why did you let them fire me? It's not really about, if my performance or whatever the factors are on the human level where the choices were made. It's because this affects me, and I think Joe said it from the beginning, and I'm going to piggyback off this, and I'm gonna ride this because of the emotional effect that it
Mhm.
has on me. I'm going to look for why. Why did this happen to me? Of all people, why me? You know, let alone it's happened to people all around the world, right? But when it affects me on that emotional level, it it triggers that, well, wait a minute, is there actually free will? You know,
mhm,
do I actually have a choice in this? And I think there's a difference between, you know, free will, have, and being able to control the outcomes. Now that might go over people's head, but my free will doesn't always control the outcomes of my life. I can
Mhm.
make decisions and stuff still happen to me. And that's where we feel like, well, wait a minute. I made this choice and nothing went my way. And so, yes, the simple answer, like you said, TC, is yes. But the complicated part of it is, what does that look like
Right.
when these things are happening out of my control and beyond my choices?
Right. Because okay, so I should let it go. It will also point to, if the answer is yes, right? You know, if God's like, yeah, human beings have a free will within their choices, their opportunities, and so forth on, then why does God stop them when they make bad choices, right? And so if humans' free will is to go on a murdering spree, why does God's power trump their decisions, right? Because that would be a question some might have. Because he's God. We're not talking about me or you. We're talking about someone who's supposed to have all power. How
Yeah.
come the person with all power can stop a puny human?
So I think one of the interesting things that happens sometimes when we go down the rabbit hole of thinking about things and processing truths and all of that kind of stuff is we can find ourselves in this rabbit hole of we reach this one particular topic and then suddenly you realize, oh, there are a lot of other topics that all stem from an
Yes.
origin point of this particular concept. I am working on a new project where it's sound bite teaching, like short form teaching. And I did a recording on relational theology. Now, for those of you that have no idea what relational theology is, essentially it's the idea that God is active in the day to day, that God is participatory in our lives, that we have an active, alive relationship with God. That may seem like, oh, yeah, of course. However, that has a lot of ripple effects. Anyway, um, I then was like, okay, where do I go for? Well, okay, let's start talking about this. Well, and it started off as kind of like basic how to's, like somebody asks, like, how do I pray? How do I read my Bible? How do I do this? How do I do that? And I'm realizing as I'm going along, um, that everything stems back to how we relate to gods. All of these different topics are affected by exactly that. And when we talk about why can't God just stop all of the bad, all of the people, all of the this, all of the that? One of you guys, you want to pull up Genesis 1, I'm going to go to 26 and 27.
Okay, I got you, Jess. You said Genesis 1.
Genesis 1, 26 and 27.
Okay.
So why doesn't God do this? Well, here's the thing though. Here's the complicated truth about the mythos of man. God did that once. That happened. That's in the Bible. It's the flood narrative. Now, your mileage may vary on what exactly you believe to be true about the flood narrative. Lord knows that I have gone back and forth and to and fro and all of those kinds of things about the flood narrative and whether I actually believe that it actually happened or if it was just like a teaching, a parable, a story to convey a particular point about God and about the character of God and all of that kind of stuff. So I want to acknowledge all of that. But before the flood, we have the creation account of man. So I promise it sounds like I'm going here, there, and everywhere, but it does tie back in. So T, you got those verses?
Yeah, you said Genesis 1, 26, 20, and 27, correct?
Yep.
Okay, then God said, let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness. Let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. And in the image of God, he created him, male, female. He created them.
So we have this picture of, okay, the creator of everything, right? He in and I'll shorthand it. I think the conversation that's happening there is between the Godhead. There's a couple of different schools of thought as far as what exactly that is. God and angels, the royal we, as far as linguistics go, or the conversation between the Godhead. I believe it's a conversation between the Godhead, and so we have this picture of the creation of man and the fact that we are created in God's likeness. Well, you fast forward to the flood. The world's gone to hell in a handbasket. Things are in a like sin has ravaged the world, and God's like, okay, Noah, get your family, get the animals, get to safety, build the ark. We're starting over. We're hitting the cosmic reset button here, folks. And so we do.
Mm,
And then we have what happens after. The promise that, okay, this happened, but this won't happen again.
mm,
This widespread destruction of everything, the cosmic reset button. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to wrap our mind around it because we look around and we're like, seriously, how much closer to hell in a handbasket do we need to get for real? But the reality is, if we it comes back to that creation account in that inherent dignity and worth that humankind has because of being in Christ likeness. That again, I'll say it. Ant said it one way. I'll say it in my way. If you guys have heard me preach before, you've probably heard me say, extrapolate out the thought process. If you have a concept,
mm,
take it out to its logical conclusion. Don't just stop at what you guys like, what feels right in that moment, what that moment is dictating. No, okay, start there but go out. Keep going out of, okay, if this is true, that makes this true, and that makes this true, and that makes this true. Because if you can do some logical deductive reasoning, you're suddenly going to find that a lot of these soft serve answers, some of these fast food answers, oh, they leave you wanting. Because if, let's go with if God says, okay, there is an objectively moral line that if you cross this, oh, the great and mighty bug zapper's coming for you. That fly swatter's coming. Who's left?
mm.
Seriously. Who's that's eventually we end up with the logical conclusion that you need a widespread devastating event like the flood to take place again, because literally everybody at some point, because again we live in the New Testament, and so everything is about the heart. We're indwelt with Holy Spirit. It's about your spirit man. You used to have to be ritually pure in the Old Testament. Now it's at a heart level. And if the idea is morality, oh well, then we've lost immediately. Like there is no winning that game, and so all would fall, and we would literally end up in a situation where it is just the Godhead left.
Yeah, because I think you say something good. Because I think that was going to be my question. Because that actually, or a statement. Because it's more of a statement. That actually makes God a quote unquote moral monster,
Mhm.
right? Because someone argue about the flood. Was he just in doing the flood?
Right.
You know, you mean tell me all those people, only Noah and his family were right? Well, what
Yeah.
made them right? You know, which could even go to a sub question of, see, God has favorites, right? Because I love how you use this example of, let's say, God's like, okay, we're just gonna wipe the slate right now. Good morning, Lelios. Um, so yeah, I think you're cooking. Hey, and did you have anything real quick? Look like you were about to say something real quick.
Well, I guess just staying with the vein, like you said, that because when you said, okay, uh, that makes God a moral monster, it even suggests that God has favorites, you
Mhm.
know,
Mm,
I- and it really, really highlights the perspective of the human side of it,
mm,
or the one who is, I don't know, a student in a class, or a a child to a parent, or what are some other examples of someone who has someone who is over them, creating the rules, handing out the assignments, having to discipline them, whatever analogy you want to put in that place. That when the teacher says that this assignment has to be done by this time, and you don't get it done, and they give you a bad grade, immediately that teacher is awful.
Yep.
They're not fair.
mm,
And then you see them give this other person an A, and you're like, "See, you like them better than me." They're
mm,
you see what I'm saying? And so
mm,
it and I don't want to reduce this down, right? I'm not trying to be reductive in this. I don't want to just kind of, make it, simplistic, and not understand where people are coming from. But
Yep.
in those type of relationships, it is hard to know that this person set a standard, and now if I don't meet that standard, I, reap whatever a bad grade, right? And then this person over here, this Noah cat, who does he think he is?
mm,
Why is he so good? Because he's not perfect. Just because I got a good grade on this assignment doesn't mean that this kid was a perfect student,
Yep.
right? There's other things I can point to. Well, he was late the other day, or and that's what we do, right? And I know this probably sounds so reductive, but I don't mean it to sound that way. I just, want us to understand that
mm.
we're looking at this from that perspective.
See, a highlight comment, and I do want to go over some simple ones as well. I think Leo said kind of feels that way, but Blue's comment is very interesting. It says, if you
Yeah, it
accept
is.
that God exists, then you accept that God is omnipotent. That's what I think he's saying, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he says, yes, God is then a moral monster, but many people don't define God this way. Uh, you got to that conclusion rather. Well, I want to see you got to rather fast, guys. I don't know your thought process, but I think I will have to
But but
disagree
he's really piggybacking off
off
of
of what we're
off of
going on,
what
what we're
yeah,
saying.
Yeah.
off of what you said about the flood. You
Right.
Yeah.
said, "You know what?
Yeah.
If that's the case, then he is," right?
Yeah.
And I
You
like
know,
it. So let's go ahead and talk. Let's dissect this a little bit and let's see if we can have a conversation about
Yeah,
this.
that's good.
So, in the sign and Blue, first and foremost, good morning to you. Thank
Thanks for
you for
joining us.
chiming in. And honestly, I always applaud somebody who is in a comment section. And I would say you stated this eloquently and
Yes.
respectfully, even though we're not on the same page. And I always give credit to somebody who is willing to jump into a comment section and be like, "Hey, I disagree with what you guys are
We love
saying, or I hold the awesome, great."
it.
So what this reads like to me, so I say all of that to say I do not want to put words in your mouth. This is a weird position to be in. I've been in your position where you're in the comment section and somebody on the live stream has the ability to be able to articulate in real time, whereas the person in the comment section cannot. And so I am not trying to take advantage of that. So, but what this reads like to me is a set of logic proofs. So, in the scientific community, generally things can be reduced down to a logic proof. If this, then this. And then if that, then that. And then if that, then that. And then you kind of go through, and from A to Z, the idea is that you are creating a quote unquote proof of the statement that you are trying to make. So what I read this as is, if you accept the premise of God, an all-knowing creator God, then you accept that that all-knowing creator God is omnipotent. If you've accepted the pre-existing conditions, then you've reached the conclusion of God being a moral monster. The scientific part of my brain, the part that was a scientist before I was ever a Christian, and I would have made an argument like this, wants to say, okay, let me take that logic proof and let me you cut out some of the meat. You know what I mean? Some of the good stuff. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong. I don't agree. I don't agree anymore. But the logic based part of my brain wants to be like, okay, this is a half baked logic proof. A non fully formed, I think, is probably a more respectful way of saying it rather than half baked. So the first step that I would say, if this is your premise, is you have to then explain, okay, what are the parameters of the God that you are asserting into your logic proof? So is it the God of the Bible? Because if it is, then yes, okay, we accept everything that we know about God. If we take the Bible seriously, if we take the Bible legitimately, then yeah, that okay, we're tracking so far, right? We've got the God of the Bible, and we've and if we take the Bible seriously, then we hit omnipotent God. Now, there's the problem is there's a section between omnipotence and morality that isn't covered here, that you would have to then make the assertion that just because he is omnipotent, then that has a direct impact on the morality of the situation. I'm going to pause myself, T, and I'm going to go ahead and let you roll because he actively
He's engaged. Yes.
respond.
I'm probably gonna butcher this word. It's the old question. How you say that?
Theodicy.
Theodicy. That's what it looked like. I was just like, I don't want to embarrass myself on the stream. Is there a God who is omni ben no
Benevolent.
benevolent? Jesus Christ, yo.
Omnipotent.
I need to and omnipotent. Why is there evil? Yeah. So you want to go ahead and take a step that you were pastor? Because
Yeah,
I think these are some very I love where this conversation is going. I really love it.
yeah. I again, the logic uh is sound, as you said, from the premise, right? But there are some things that are, I think there's liberties that are being taken, in the argument. And so uh this particular argument boils down to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, and I think it would have helped, to hear some of that. So one of the things that uh with God being loving, all loving, all powerful, right? And then let's add in all knowing. He didn't use that, omniscient, all knowing. Okay. Then why is there evil? Well, evil is subjective. Now, I know this is going to be a tough one, because something that I would say is evil to me may not be evil to the next person, because evil is something that causes me harm from, or causes someone harm, discomfort, difficulty, because even difficulty can be considered evil, right?
Mhm.
especially from a biblical perspective. And I know, Joe, you'll get into it. I know you guys did an incredible job on sin versus evil, right? And what is sinful and what is evil, and how those things can be juxtaposed. And but I'll stick with, when we talk about evil, evil is really based on the circumstance, the situation, the person, right? And so somebody may say Hurricane Burrow was evil,
Hmm.
right? They may say that's evil. Why would God, who is all loving, all powerful, and all knowing, allow for that to happen? Because Burrow did damage, homes. I know there were people injured. I don't know if lives were lost, but someone would say that is evil,
I have
right?
some clients in the area, lives were lost.
Yes. So someone would say that that's evil. And why does God allow for that? You know, in other words, I need God to intervene in any area that uh would cause harm. Well, again, like you said, you have to follow you have to extrapolate that out. I'll use your your language, Joe, because I like it. You're gonna have to extrapolate that out, because now it comes down to even individual decisions that
Yeah.
I may not feel like is evil. He's going to have to stop me. He's going
Yep.
to have to he's going to have to eliminate my ability to make that choice, even if I don't see it as wrong, right? So in this situation, him being all loving, so his love then comes in and comforts and cares for those who have experienced loss, hurt, pain. His power is shown through his ability to redeem and to save eternally, not just in this life, right? And then his knowledge of it is that he prepares us and he lets us understand and know that in this life there are going to be these things. Before Jesus left his disciples, he told them something that is astonishing when you think about this question. He said, in this life
Mm.
there will be tribulation. Tribulation is uh tantamount to things that are going to be difficult, things that are be harsh, hard, and hard to deal with,
Mhm.
right? And so he forewarned us of these things. And when he forewarns us of these things, he gives us an answer to do in times when these things happen. And so he doesn't rob us of the ability to make our choices, decisions, to be able to live. He allows us to live, but he says, but I am here to help and put the pieces back together. And so I'll pause there. And if there's, a kind of a answer or rebuttal, let you do that. And then Joe, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Um, so I think there has to be an acknowledgement of something that sounds super cliche, and Blue and the rest of the viewing audience who is watching this, I fully and totally admit that I'm about to sound like a really bad Christian track from the 90s. um if in an ultimate expression of benevolence, I'll use your word, Blue, benevolence,
Mm.
he gave us the ability to choose him, to choose to follow him. That's something that has been baked into creation and covenant from in the beginning. We see it with Adam and Eve. We see it in post Egypt. We see it from with Abraham. We see it and several times. We see it continually, and because the alternative to what you're talking about, the alternative to like it to again extrapolate out the thought process. If he is omnipotent, and because of his omnipotence he is going to stop the ability for evil, then humans either cannot exist, or humans must be created as robots, as automatons, as mindless creations that are only subject to the whim of God. And so to me, and I will take my hat, I will take my pastor hat off here for a second and put my philosophy hat on for a second. I don't always dig talking about philosophy, because generally they tend to be circular arguments of people trying to prove a specific point, and it's all theory and no application by and large. But let's get into the philosophical. To me, if God creates a whole creation full of people who only have the ability to follow his ways, who have no other nature or ability to choose anything else, if literally anybody else, if literally anything else were to do that, we would call that egomaniacal.
Mhm.
We would call that a dictator. We would call that a vicious ruler. We would have a lot to say about that. And so if humankind can exist without the capacity for evil, then that means we have no ability to choose anything in our lives, and we are going from one thing to another thing to another thing. And I think sometimes the philosophical argument then gets mixed in with the emotional argument of, well, if I know everything, so if people don't have I'll get in there, I'll get in there and just I'll play T's role, because T is the consummate transparent person on the stream.
Right.
I'll go ahead and take that one for you this time, T.
Thank you, sir.
If people don't have a choice, then maybe my stepdad doesn't take his life.
Mm.
If people don't have a choice, then maybe my biological father wasn't, by every standard and measurement by polite society, a scumbag. Maybe if people didn't have a choice, then one of my closest friends would still be alive.
Mm.
That's the thought process that gets engaged with. That's where we kick the can around. Where if we are saying that evil, why is there evil, then generally the conversation becomes, if there was evil, then such and such wouldn't have happened, then this thing wouldn't have happened, then this widespread event wouldn't have happened, then this would, okay, but then all you're doing is playing a cosmic game of what if. Because at that point, if we are sticking to a logic-based proof, then a key variable has changed, which changes literally everything. It changes the entire equation. We are literally no longer working off of the same premise. So if we are really going to investigate this and interrogate this and look at these different modes of thinking, yes, there is the Christian response. And Ant, you have been doing an amazing job of being able to address this very much in line as a middle-aged pastor and somebody long in the tooth of walking with people in the midst of some of the worst things that a human being can go through on this planet. 1000%. But the other dynamic of this is if we are going to interrogate these topics, then we have to hit them from the other points of view as well. And again, I thank you, Blue, because people, this is the example, and I'm going to use him and shout out to the comment section to the rest of you guys that are watching. This is the power of being able to engage and to bring something up, because now it's an inroad to be able to address these different facets and be authentic about what it is that we are saying and really interrogate this. So that way, when we step away from conversations like this, we can be in this posture of, oh, I have a lot to think about. I have a lot to consider. I have other perspectives and other points to stick into the map that aren't just driven by a focus, whatever that focus is, however it's whatever it's driven by.
Yeah, man. First off, bro, I just want to say I appreciate you live because that was good. Yeah, that was definitely a move I would have pulled. For sure. The more I think about it, yeah, man, because I think as I'm moderating and stuff, I take my relationship with God personally. So I get questions like this all the time. That's why I'm almost baffled. That's why I shout out to Blue. Blue, we want you to know we shouting you out because we love the dialogue. And I want to really, again, not to be in the ground, encourage others to join in and to really um my bad to join in and really dive into this conversation, because as a Christian, I am confident you're going to have this question answered to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like I said, I do gaming, I make content, and I'm in the world of fantasy a lot. Some might argue, right, or fandom, because we talked about this now months ago. And so, in that, God's always a fictitious character that's crazily out of line with morality, or he's a dictator. And I'm grateful for you two having this conversation, because I feel like you two are approaching this from a very logical standpoint. And these gentlemen are crushing it. I just want to just give you guys your flowers as you're on stream, because I just think it's good, because I think I hit from more of an emotional standpoint, because I'm like, someone's talking about my God, just like they're talking about you, and they're talking about his character. It's one thing to have a conversation about one's character, to call on the questions about one's character, and there's one to be accusatory to one's character. I had a guy on my Facebook said that God condones rape and slavery, and because that's in the same vein, right? Because this is God's fault, and I don't think I have the grace like you guys. So as much as, guys, as I'm on this stream, and yes, I'm a pastor, I'm learning from these two gentlemen right now, because they've been very tactful, they've been very gracious. But I don't know if I had the grace with that gentleman, because I was just like, I think that's very well. I didn't cuss him out, so maybe let me clarify. Let me go ahead and put this out here,
I didn't really let him have it. I just
because
I
I
wanted
don't
to.
want to think that I just laid into this guy. But I'll be lying if I said there wasn't a fire that was burning in me, because I want this guy to understand that he is wrong. And that wrong is not coming from a place of you're wrong, shut up. It's you're wrong, I wish you would see him differently. Because if you see God differently, then man, that creates an opportunity for connection. As long as you have a view about someone that you think is correct, it creates disconnect. It creates a world where you and this person can't connect, because this is what you've been told. I said, so first off, because he's a God of the Bible. I think that's where he made a mistake. And I was like, well, we're talking about God of the Bible. You're wrong, because I think he was talking about Lot in um the his daughter's situation, and that's what he was classifying as rape. And I was like, well, first off, we have to really look at this passage. Um, Lot is mourning. He lost his wife. For him, he probably is really thinking the world is over for him. So he's instead of mourning, His daughters are in the same vein. They're mourning. They're going through. They're thinking about survival. So they're like, well, let's procreate because if this is the end, we need a lineage. So right there, and I'm just was being, I was like, this is consensual. I know you don't like this, but this is the daughters coming to the father saying this is what we should do. So these are men in their choices, because that's what we're talking about, right? These are men in their choices. And I love that the Bible does this. I love that the Bible gives us stories where we get to see man's choices and we get to see God's choices, right? Because the illusion is that we don't have choice. But the Bible is full of both people having choices or both personas having choices, God's choices that he makes, that he's going to do. And we see human and God make choices together. And I said, so in this case, you see that this family made this choice out of these circumstances. But that's them making this choice. That was not God saying, yeah, Lot, I command that you do this. I said, because we'll see that this end up becoming the biggest problem to Israel in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Some of their enemies are created in this cave.
Can I get a little piece of that?
Go ahead, because I got another one too. Go ahead. Jump in there, bro.
Well, because I remember when myself and Joe, and I don't know if Andrew was on the stream for that portion, because that was way back in Genesis, like 1,500 years ago when we did that, when we did Genesis. But I remember when we got to that portion,
Yeah,
and
I was going to bring that up.
we both were like, "Oh, here we go."
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
it was
thing
so
that,
uncomfortable.
and it's uncomfortable because sometimes truth and transparency can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And we had to applaud scripture for not hiding the
Yeah.
gory details.
Yeah.
Yep.
What if God hid that and just gave you this nice, clean story?
Yeah.
And didn't allow you to see, as you said, TC, so eloquently, human beings making decisions.
Yep.
Just because human beings make decisions and the Bible reports those decisions doesn't mean that the Bible is teaching or approving or promoting
Cooking.
those decisions. So to use our terminology from our Friday mornings, you look at this and you say, well, what does this say about God's character? Well, it says that God is open and honest.
Yep.
He's not hiding it from you. Number two, that God allows man. He gave you free will and he lets you use your free will.
Mhm.
But at the same time, those choices led to, as you said, consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if there were no consequences, then I would say that God is promoting
Right.
these type of things, incest,
Yeah.
rape, if there were no consequences. If
Yeah.
there was no if there was nothing that came afterwards and that it was all sunshine and rainbows and there was pats on the back. But like you said, Job is grieving. He's gone through a difficult time. He's lost his wife. He's in this cave drinking. They have come to the conclusion that the whole world is gone and they're the only people on the planet. And from that cultural standpoint, again, and we say this week after week, this is a different time, a different culture, a a different set of circumstances.
Yep.
They believe that there was no more people on the planet. And they said it in the text, right?
Yeah.
There's no more men on the planet. And if we don't give our father an heir, then it's over. And it's like that thinking for me in the 21st century is like, what are you talking about?
Right.
But if I remember that this is not my culture, this is not my time, this is not my circumstance,
Right.
then I have to concede that, man, that's a whole different world and a whole different set of values. And so that I think that is a difficult uh, uh, a difficult place to read if you don't keep the fundamentals to reading the Bible in your peripheral or in front of you and say, okay, I can't use my rubric. I have to use their rubric.
Right. And
So
go ahead.
one of the things that on Friday mornings we have found ourselves saying over and over and over again that it is and we're not even through the entirety of the first five yet. And we are constantly reminded about how much of humanity is on display, and that's not generally the stereotype that section of scripture gets. It's that it's either stories that are way over your head, or it's laws and numbers and rules, or it's an angry god. That's generally the stereotypes that tend to come about. But I would really strongly suggest for anybody who is looking for a spot of scripture that really addresses the intersection between humanity and the divine is go to Genesis. But there's a couple of prerequisites. You gotta leave whatever intention you have at the door. You cannot be reading it to say, I'm reading it for this express purpose, or for to read this into it like a specific creation narrative or a specific interpretive pattern to these stories that have been passed down, because the first huge chunk of Genesis, and where a lot of people tend to start to get tripped up before even getting to the stuff that's considered more historical in nature, is trying to interpret this whole idea of what is the framework, what is the concrete nature of these stories, how do we interpret them, and all of that kind of stuff. And so if you can stop yourself from saying, was it 7 days or 7,000 years? Was it a small localized flood, or was it a flood over the entire planet? Was it this or was it that? And say, what does this teach me about God, and what does this teach me about how God interacts with mankind? Then suddenly you're left with a section of scripture that explores the depths of the complexities of the human experience and how God responds to that. Let's take it back to the flood, right? We keep using that as a reference point. So I'll go back there and use it as a reference point. So we've got Noah, we've got his family, we've got the animals. Everybody else is screwed. Um, and we look at Noah and say, who's this guy?
Right.
What'd he do? Who'd he ever beat? And what if we change the lens just a little bit? Let's pivot that camera just a little bit and say, okay, what if a potter who's working with the clay now, the interpretive patterns of pottery and clay in the West show how many people have not ever worked with clay pots. Like, seriously, there are research projects that people have done that they show potters that who are professing atheists who do not know anything about the Bible that verse, and they've got a better insight just because they've worked with clay before. And the fact that it is unruly, and it has seemingly a mind of its own, and you can do what you think is right, and it just goes wild in your hands. And that's the imagery that we have with God and his creation. He created a creation that can affect him. That's part of relational theology. And so if we take it back to the flood, and if the world is just sin ridden and it's just devastated, well, if it's a God who's never sinned, then isn't he within his realm to say, I am the creator, thus says the Lord, everything dies? But that's not what happened. There was a moment where God said, okay, I'm going to preserve through these people, and I'm going to make an opportunity for redemption. Fast forward to Abraham. Through your line, a great nation will be born, and it will be a means for redemption. Fast forward to the New Testament, there is a need for a savior,
Hmm.
and so there is a means for redemption. That's the double-edged sword of philosophy, right? Because you can kick the philosophical can here, there, and everywhere and use the same exact set of circumstances and paint God out to be this disgusting, wretched, evil being that just wants people to follow him because he is on a cosmic ego trip.
Right. And since you're on that, so we can
Yeah.
pivot right here. I want to pause and ask the question: what do we mean by monster?
Mhm.
Like what's our definition? Because I think Joe, you're onto something. Because it does seem that people have these warped views of God. So what do we mean by monster? That's the title of our stream today. Is the
Mhm.
moral monster? What are we defining by that?
So, Ant, I'm going to let you go first because afterwards, I, being the millennial out of this group, yes, T is also a millennial, but being a millennial, I'm going to do my good millennial duty to take aim at the boomer generation. So, I'll let you go first.
Well, I think for me, this is something that I need to understand. Because when I hear God is a moral monster, I'm like, okay, so what do they mean? You
Yeah.
know, uh, because it's not language that I use, and so more so than to give an answer, I would like to, hear answer and learn more of what is this perspective, about what is meant, by a moral monster. What do we mean? So I'd rather kind of listen and hear.
All right. So, T, I'm going to
Mhm.
paint a picture and I want to see if this resonates with you, being of the same kind of vintage that I am. So you're in a church and pastor's in the front, probably in a suit, in the paradigm that I'm describing, generally in a fine pressed suit, and it is a service centered around you need to grab onto the life raft
Mm,
before the fires of hell
mm,
swallow you up. You need to turn away from the evils of sin
mm,
and grab on to God. Time is almost up. It is
mm.
time to turn or burn.
Okay, come on now.
So you asked a question, what is a monster? And I tongue in cheek said the whole bit about boomers because that tends to be a lot of the arguments coming from the millennial camp. Is it's the generation that came before us, generally because we are looking to the archetype of the older, generally old white man pastor that's up in the pulpit and yelling about how you need to turn or burn and fear God, right? You need to fear the wrath of God. You
Yeah.
better get on his good side or else God is going to strike you
Mm,
down.
mm, mm.
And there is an archetype that
Yeah.
we build around that, and it's generally born out of something that we've seen, something that we've experienced, and it is 1000% based around this idea of fear going to hell, fear the wrath of God, and get saved.
Mm,
And it's this idea that for those that do not agree with God, or those that do not do right or follow the ways of God, that God will strike you down and devastate everything. If you make a mistake over here, he will punish you. Oh, your car broke down? You must have sinned.
Oh man.
It
You
sounds
didn't-
like I'm being tongue in cheek. It sounds like I'm
No.
being sarcastic, and
No.
I'm doing a little bit,
No.
but it's born again out of a place of reality. This is stuff that's taught. This is stuff that there's a reason why I look at people who say this stuff, who say Christians just believe that, and I'm like, you probably heard a Christian popping off at the mouth saying something stupid that isn't biblical, and this is where we're at. That you want the honestly you want the best people suited to give Christianity a black eye. It's Christians.
Ooh.
Christians do the best job at screwing things up. And so we end up in these situations where we make these statements all in the name of trying to save souls, trying to win people for Jesus. Billy Graham did a lot of good in this world. That is one of the things that bothers me to no end. We're gonna win souls for Jesus.
I like Billy Graham, but
I
yeah, he did number.
yeah
You sound like him earlier when you were like doing your
yeah.
you're doing your mix.
There might have been some slight influence there, but so I bring all of that up to say, so what is a monster?
Yeah.
It is this creeping shadow in the periphery. It is this cosmic being that is waiting for you to screw up. He's waiting for you to make a mistake and to trip up, and he is expecting that you follow the rules, and if you don't follow the rules, then woe betide. We do not talk about the fact that he loves his creation, because the only way that he loves his creation is if his creation follows him. Everybody else, get rocked. You're getting to the you're done. That is what we look at when we say a moral monster. And then from that point is where we start to get into some of the ground that we've already covered, when we start to talk about, well, oh, okay, so this great and cosmic God wants to throw lightning bolts around like he's Zeus or something. Then who is he to be able to say who's good and who's bad? Oh, what? All this person can do good? All this person can do all the good in the world. Oh, what? They don't believe in God, and so thus they're this wretched, terrible, disgusting creature, and all of this kind of stuff. That is a moral monster.
Yeah, I think that is that's why I said I couldn't have articulated that, because I've never saw or taught God that way. And so that's something that actually I have seen and I've dismissed. That's a kook. You know, I just dismiss those kind of people as being weird. But
No, they real, bro.
from what you're saying, yeah, if that is the picture, if that's the mainstream idea, you know, of what God is, then that helps me to understand where we're coming, because that is a monster.
Yeah.
That is a creepy, like you said, figure who's uh who is built off of fear. You know, when I think of a monster, I think of something
Yeah.
scary that goes bump in the night,
Yeah.
right? The boogeyman that's going to get me, you know? And yeah, man, that is.
Yeah,
Can,
because
can I give a for instance real quick? Can I
Yeah.
give a for instance? I was in a men's group, and I listened to this dude say, and it really got me thinking. I listened to this dude say, I don't ever want to make a promise to God. We were working out of Ecclesiastes 5, and this dude goes, I don't ever want to make a promise to God. And I was like, oh yeah, why is that? He's like, well, read the text. Look at how seriously he takes that. I don't want that problem. When I inevitably mess that up, I don't want to make God angry like that. And immediately it struck me that there is deep-seated fear-based theology in all of this. And it's not, nobody picks up fear-based theology and says, I'm actively going to embrace fear-based theology. I've
Right.
never met a person who says that. Like they
Right.
wouldn't call it that. They would pick up the tenets, but they wouldn't flat out say, I am embracing fear-based theology. But when we apply our humanistic perspective to this omnipotent, grand, majestic, huge figure, this huge concept of God, and then try to fit our perspectives into it, we can end up in a spot where our own experiences are dictating what we see to be true about God without actually exploring what's happening. I used to be like you, man. I used to be like, when I would hear somebody pop off with something stupid about this, that, or the other, I would just be like, what are you even talking about? Like open up your Bible and go touch grass. Get off the internet. Like seriously, stop reading message forums and go just read your Bible and understand what, and I wouldn't give it the time of day. Then I realized as I got into this pastoral ministry thing that, oh, this is coming out of a place of trauma. This is coming out of a place of hurt. This is coming out of a place of experience. This is coming out of a humanistic perspective that's driving the concept before we even get to that's issue number one before we even get to who is God and what is his character.
Right. And you both did good, because I definitely agree with both stances, because yeah, I am from that generation where didn't have Billy Grahams in my church, but I would say people who were very superstitious.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy because I felt there was more superstition in being a Christian than there was when I was not a Christian. And we'd be like, what do you
Talk about
mean? Yeah, we'd be
talk
like,
about that.
what do you mean by that? So my mom always was weirdly superstitious, step on a crack, break your mama's back. Don't split poles. That was my mom's biggest thing. That was hard, especially when I started reading the Bible. It's like, don't split poles, because it was superstitious. Split a pole, that's bad luck. Um, Black cat means something bad's about to happen, right? I'm just throwing things out there growing up. But when I became a Christian, um, I didn't look at it as superstition at first. Look at it as like, oh, you better not do this because this is God now, and God trumps superstition. So, um, we've been talking about it tongue in cheek all stream. Our car breaking down. Oh, that means God doesn't want me to go there. That wasn't God's will. Um, I don't know. I didn't pray over my food, bite my tongue. See, that's why you should have prayed. I'm doing very light things, right? And I can't think of a big one right now, because like you, and I think I've kind of really detached from that type of thinking. So it's kind of hard to see God in a different light now. You kind of follow where I'm going, but those are some things. And so that was more superstitious than the stuff my mom taught me, because
Mhm.
those are superstitions now. They're not actual facts about who God is.
Yeah.
They're things that you avoid so something doesn't happen. Making it a superstition in that regard. So, here we go. Tithing. Here we go. I think this is a big one, because
Oh,
as I've been
you're
on
gonna
here,
open a
yeah,
can of worms.
and that's fine. 'Cause I think we'll see what the Lord wants to do with the rest of the stream. But no, I can't even say that. Dang it. I can't even say it, because people that make such a stink about it. Because that's how I talk. I am a person, and Joe knows this, that I'm very relational with God. So I
Yeah.
view God as a person who talks back to me. But I also understand who I am, and I understand the Bible and the Word of God. So when I'm saying something, I'm literally pulling from Scripture. I'm not pulling from my imaginary friend that I'm talking to. No, I'm pulling from a person who's real, that I learned about, I study about, and I know its characteristics. But that's a different
Right.
stream. But yeah, still, since we're since we're on that, yeah, tithing, bro. I didn't like the tie. I think I said this before. We in past when we talked about this in stream. I wasn't a big tither because, again, coming from that low key boomer generation, our pastors had shiny cars and
Mhm.
nice stuff.
Yeah.
And then I have moms and dads that are like, we ain't giving our money to the church because they pimping. Pastors are pimps. So that's how I saw pastors growing up as pimps and players and dudes who can sound really good. Like those dudes sound good, bro. Don't they sound kind of listen, all gimmicks aside, like they listen, there's something about the hooping and hollering that just sounds good. I'm sorry. So I was always fascinated by that. It's still a low-key
Is that
fascinated.
is that why you are the way that you are, man? I'm just saying.
Absolutely, man. It's fascinating. It's just, I'm sorry. You take me to a Baptist church to this day, or a what they say. I'm thinking the other one. I cannot think right now, but Baptist or Kojic. There we go. I was trying to give there's a fascination to how they do stuff.
Yeah.
I just personally like it. But yeah, so tithing. Not to got kilter too much. Yeah, that was my thought process. So when I started to learn about tithing more when I got older as a Christian, I made a superstition because I was irresponsible with money and I was young and I'll just keep it static. I might want to use money to go buy me a game instead of prioritizing rent and stuff like that. And so I can associate at the time that those are my bad choices when something didn't go right financially. That's got punishing me because I didn't tie.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I'm using something very complex but simple in a sense. So yeah. So when I didn't give my 10% in that plate that was going
Yeah.
around the church, oh yeah, God's gonna come for me. He gonna get me.
Yeah.
And I had this always shamefully. Okay, listen, I'm really telling myself shamefully. I had this thinking all the way up to my late 20s.
Yeah.
And that means I was going to Sure Foundation. You like, well, you're going to
Yeah.
Sure Foundation thinking like that? Absolutely.
Well,
I
it's
have no
it's
problem.
so
It's not
pervasive.
right. It's not Ant's fault. It is totally not his fault. Let me put that out there publicly. It is not him. First lady's fault because I
That bus
really.
had your name written all over it.
Oh man.
That was coming for you. I just want you to
I
understand
know,
that.
but I just want to put it out there. This was just me and me not wanting to be honest because we gotta be real. A lot of these conversations, even the one we're having right now, it's about your honesty.
Yeah.
Because the thing about the human experience and human mind is, for our better or for worse, is that we come to conclusions based off of our feelings, not based off of truth all the time. And we'll make our feelings a truth and then say that's the conclusion. So
Hmm.
that's what happened here is because this is based off of my feelings. I'm not based off of any or logic. I'm not talking to other people. I'm not getting reference or anything. I'm just going off of my own logic, even though I have all the tools right in front of me, right? And so I'm like, this is how God works. You don't pay your money. You better be looking over your shoulder because
Yeah.
something gonna go wrong. Not thinking, well, bro, you didn't manage your money right. So
Mhm.
things are going to go wrong just because of that principle by itself that you didn't manage well. And so there's that. And so I finally talked to, truthfully, my first lady about finances because she was working with my finances for a good year. And then I'm talking to both of them, and it was just like, well, that's not how God works. But I will say this: there's a peace when you are being obedient and you are giving 10%. There's this piece that you have that God got. But or if you don't, because this is what messed me up about Joe. If you don't tie, or if you do, God is faithful. Period. Oh wait. I was like, hold, pause, time out, time out. So God's not going to strike the bank account. No, He's faithful. He's going to provide because that's who God's character is. And if you think about it, that's who He's always been. He's going to be who He is. He's going to be faithful whether people do or not. The biggest thing that we walk away with a lot of times when we're looking at a lot of situations is our own emotional box. We have our emotions, we feel something about God, and then we'll say that's how God is. So if
Mhm.
this is me dumbing it down. I'm not trying to comfort anyone. This is literally for me saying this about me. So I would people on target. If I'm unfaithful, then God has to be unfaithful. What do you mean by that? Well, if I pick and choose where I want to be faithful at, then God pick and choose where he wants to be faithful at. The problem is on a human level, let's go human level. On a human level, if I was to do that to Joe, you would say, that's so unfair of you. You're projecting or deflating. Wow, deflecting your emotions on Joe and saying that's how he works. And Joe's a whole different person. He has his own thought processes. He has his own characteristics, right? Well, why do we do that with God? Just because a human's unjust, unfaithful, doesn't manage their money well. Talk about this guy. Why does God become a bad mismanager of his stewardship, his ability to be faithful and provide? The connection I got out of this to bring this home is that I give to God because he's graciously give to me. That's the principle I see in the Bible is that God, the people, when they experienced God, they were grateful and they gave to God. Here's the crazy part. Early on in the Bible, God never asked for that. These are human beings who are like, God, this is amazing. What you did, this land you brought me to, the situation you brought me out of. I'm setting some aside because you didn't have to do that for me. So we see that. Oh, I didn't know God was going to do that. We see in this instance, the human being initiated this. And then God is like, from here on out, then God talks about this principle of giving. And so it's crazy because, again, something as simple as that, right? We can make superstitious. I don't do something right, God gets me. And that goes to that moral monster. Is that whatever I do wrong, God's around that corner lurking. And that was big in the 90s. I hate to say it just was. That was just the teaching. Is that you want it's kind of weirdly still in this society right now, but I just think it took a different form and now just be a whole nother stream. But like you said, Joe, you want God on your side, brother. You don't want to be an enemy of God. You want him on your side because if he's on your side, then good things happen to you. If bad things are happening to you, you may not be on God's good side. And man, that messes people up. I don't know where Ant went, but do we want to
his
pause?
he texted me and said his power went out.
Yeah, I saw that he froze for a minute. I was like, he should have a lot to say about that because I remember. That's it. That's why he was looking like he's like I remember these conversations because I just couldn't because I had so much trauma because bro I'm serious because I'm like why would I give my money to the church? I need my monies. Okay, and I'll give it I'll give God my service in a different way. And so yeah, very small. You know what? Are we trying to wait for him to get back on? Or are we
No, I don't think he's gonna be
it.
on that quickly. Yeah, I think you inadvertently stumbled upon our next conversation about giving and obedience and tithing. So the one thing I will say with that, while keeping the thing, because there were things that you said that I could have a field day with. But and guys, this is what it looks like when somebody is like, don't take the bait, don't take the bait, don't take the bait, don't take the bait. But yeah, it's something. So there's a lot of topics and finances, giving, tithing, all of that very easily can become one of those topics where you can pour a lot of things into it, and it doesn't help that we have quite possibly the single worst. You ready? I'll be the de facto heat magnet for most evangelicalism in this conversation. It's especially difficult when churches are out here promoting quite possibly one of the single worst set of teachings on finances that exist on God's green earth and Financial Peace University. I said what I said, and I am not accepting questions at this time. It is a dumpster fire, regardless of whatever perspective, and you can agree with this thing and not agree with this thing and do this and do that and all of that kind of stuff. But the topics become dumpster fires because they become more about what we're reading into it or more about what we've experienced and thus we've attributed to this and thus we teach than it does about the realities of God's character, God's loyalty, God's heart, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can't wait to have this conversation when we do, because it was one of those things where now I look at it, I'm like, again, if we're talking relational, right? It
Yeah.
makes sense. Like me and Joe have been knowing each other for 2 years,
Hmm.
and within those two, actually longer than 2 years. So I say 2 years. I'm capping hard,
It's more like
bro.
three, I think.
It's 3 to 4.
3 to 4, yeah.
Yeah, three to
Time
four
flies
years.
when you're having fun.
I know, right? So out of those 2 years, truthfully, me and Joe were just building. We, did lives together. We talked, but I would say around. That's what I think I did 2 years. Last year, we really started really just kicking it, hanging out more, talking on the phone, and out of that friendship, Joe was like, "Hey, man, I want to send you something." I'm like, "Oh, what he got for me?" He got me a Kingdom Hearts poster. You probably can't see it because it's like high in my background, but why am I bringing that up? Because out of relationship, his heart was to give. And then my turn was, I want to give him something. You know, is it so far fetched that people have that was happening in the Bible? But what happens is, like you're saying, Joe, this because I'm not trying to be that guy like prosperity gospel is horrible, prosperity is, but it does come from that stench that's in our church. Is that
Yep.
you you can't be God's given. Maybe we should name the title like something weird like that. I don't know. But it's like there's this thing where now giving is perverted and it's about what you can get out of it. And so again, living in the capitalistic society that we're in America, you better believe our churches have, because there's a system behind it, right, Joe? There's this
Yep.
system of why we want these numbers a certain type of way.
Yeah.
And there's a system that, well, we got to make sure it's God. Because again, going into morality and even sticking in the vein of the stream, if we get people to believe God's a certain type of way about money, then maybe that can influence how people give money. I
Yep.
don't know, that's like very sinister and scandalous, but there's some
Well, it's
underlying
not.
truths behind that in the
Yeah.
common church. But listen, guys, unfortunately, well, actually to me, we're on beat.
Yeah.
Listen, this was a powerful conversation. You guys were good. Shouts again. We have Blue. We had a lot of lurkers today. I was watching a lot of lurkers. People just kind of listening, and we're okay with that. You guys know what our next topic is going to be. So this is what I want you to do right now, because we're already hinting what our next topic is going to be. We need you to tell a friend about these streams, okay? Even if this stream is over, share the stream. Share this conversation, man. Joe and Pastor were dropping some nuggets, man. They were just, it was good. I'm going to go back and listen to it again because there was a lot of stuff I was like, man, I approach situations like that, but there was just there was a lot of nuances that were powerful, and there was a lot of big things that were just like, okay, you might want to actually consider this way of thinking when it comes
Yeah.
to God. That were really good, and I think you guys can take a lot of that even after the stream and share it with a family and a friend that you can help them with their processes of thinking, because this definitely helped me as a pastor. Because like I said, I'm in a situation where I'm in fandom. People are going to talk about my God. They're going to talk about how they think he is. And I want to be able to have a genuine conversation. And just to clarify again, like I said, I didn't destroy that dude. That dude came on my page looking for smoke. I was promoting a video. He just came on. He's, oh, yeah, the God of the rapist. Yeah, right. I'm like, okay, well, first off, you're going to come on my page being disrespectful. We got to talk about some things. But like I said, I was gentle. But I did help this dude understand that he's not reading the Bible, that he's going off of what other people say. And that is the common consensus, is that, guys, the reason why we want you to take these streams and digest them is that way you come with your own consensus. You have proof and facts. These are skilled men on here who have put their existence into what they do. Not that still a phrase from my boy, but they have had their teeth kicked in. They have been through some things, and they had to learn, and they are now teaching from a place of not only just experience but truth from the Bible. This is the
Mhm.
best place to be, and of course, I do the same thing. So that's why we want you to share. Listen, um, last but not least, if you're not following the pages, make sure you follow the pages on Facebook. We're really more active on Facebook. We're everywhere. We're on YouTube. I know when we stream, we go everywhere. We are on YouTube. We're on Facebook. There's a couple pages on Facebook that we're going live from. So make sure wherever you're watching from, you are following. That you find the stream. Make sure you hit the follow because we do this every Saturday. Okay. And if we don't do it Saturday, we usually announce it on the pages. That's why you want to follow those pages so that way you have an idea if we're not going live or we are. For the most part, we're going to be here doing what we're doing right
Yeah.
now. With that being said, Joe, I'll turn it over to you and we'll go ahead and get out of here.
Guys, thank you all for joining us for another edition of Let It Rip. We will be back live 9:30 a.m. Eastern next Saturday morning for another spicy conversation, I am sure. But until next time, y'all, remember, you are prayed for, you are loved.